Welcome to the Bonafide Leaders Podcast with your host, Tim G. Williams. Let's get to it. Hello, Tim G. Williams again for another episode of the Bonafide Leaders Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the 5 rules for promoting people, especially to leadership roles. Now, you've got 3 do's and 2 don'ts. So what I want to do here is I want to hear from you. What are these rules? And then I want to expound on each of them one at a time.
Yeah.
So, all right. Let's hear it. 5 rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So 5 rules of promoting people and promoting people into what I'll call people leadership roles. Largely in the context of an organizational structure, ideally in a middle to larger size organization. That's where these fit, although they could possibly fit in other places too. Rule 1 is really looking to promote people based upon a track record of both growth and leadership. And of course, we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail later. The second rule that I believe is really important to have as it relates to promoting leaders is a demonstration of character and integrity, and a consistent demonstration of character and integrity. Rule number 2. Now, these actually aggregate together. So you do rule number 1 plus rule number 2. My argument is that you're actually already probably 60 to 80% of the way there in terms of having everything you need to feel good that you got the right person. Rule number 3 is really coming down to communication. You promote people based upon their communication and emotional intelligence. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those things are. Rule number 4 is caution. I won't say never. I try to be careful with never, but use caution when promoting leaders who are technical experts or big idea people. And then rule number 5, never. I do have to use a never on this one. Never promote selfish, overly arrogant, what I'll call narcissists into your organization, unless you just want to have a real mess on your hands. The first 3 are about what we ought to do when it comes to promoting leaders into people leadership roles. And the last 2 are about what not to do, or to use extreme caution when we do.
Right. Okay. I have several questions about especially 3 and 4, being a communicator, being what I maybe is a big idea person. I want to dive into those. But let's start with rule 1 first.
Yeah. All right. So rule 1, here we're promoting people who have a track record of both leadership qualities as well as growth. So let's talk about what we mean there. When I think about growth, I think about someone who has maybe started, let's say, as in an entry level role. Maybe you're an accountant, you're a business analyst, you're an IT analyst, you're an associate at a law firm or a consulting firm. And that's just about really learning the job, being responsible for executing something. And now you're ready to go to that next role. Maybe it's a first line supervisor. Maybe you are a leader of other associates, what have you. Well, what we're looking for is, have you demonstrated that you can grow either by function, because you've moved, let's say, from being a specialist in one area of law to now another area of law? Have you demonstrated that you can move from, let's say, sales, now you're moving into marketing? And maybe from marketing, you've actually now moved into a PR role specifically. That's a demonstration of growth. Maybe the lights were a little bit bright. In the first role, you had 2 or 3 big stakeholders, and now we've seen you go from that role to a role in which you've got maybe 5 or 6 big stakeholders. So have we seen growth? Leadership really is the art of influence, the art and the science, you could say, of influence. And my rule of thumb was always this, particularly when I was VP of large organizations, $2 billion, $3 billion size organizations with directors reporting to me, was that I will not promote you into this role just because you had a past title of being a leader or a manager or director. What I'm looking for is your demonstrated ability to influence without authority. Do people say yes to you? Are they interested in your ideas? Do they tend to rally around you because of your influence capability, not because of your title? And so that's what we're looking for when we talk about rule number one. Have they demonstrated leadership? Do they have qualities that say, hey, I want to follow this person regardless of their title? And then number two, is there a track record of their own personal development and growth? And we'll maybe come back to this in a little bit more detail, but there's another principle related to rule number one that I want to make sure we hit as well.
Okay. This totally makes sense to me. And this is something that you've talked about a lot with Bonafide leaders. And the whole point is to have character and integrity, to be a real leader that's got real experience, that knows what they're talking about. So that makes sense.
Yeah. There's this concept, which you may have heard of, prophets or listeners have heard of, called the Peter Principle. And I hadn't heard of this until the time in which one of my bosses made this comment to me. So I had recently been promoted into a role and probably was a little bit ahead of when I really was ready to take on that role based upon just experience levels. I mean, I didn't think I was quite ready for it. And I think probably a number of other people did not think I was really ready for that role either. And so I was having this conversation with my boss, and he says, Tim, I think I may have asked him a question about, just tell me what made you think I was ready, or do you know I'm ready, or something like that. Because I still wasn't really confident at this point in the job. And he told me that, Tim, the Peter Principle says that, you're promoted until you reach your level of incompetence. He just said it with such a straight face. And I just, was taken aback by that. So are you saying I'm incompetent for the job? Like,
right,
what exactly
Exactly.
are you saying? But his point was that I realize that I'm sort of taking a little bit of a risk on you right now. And the truth is that, just like me, when I've hired people in roles that other people say, oh, I wouldn't do that. Well, the Peter Principle could apply. I mean, you just don't know whether or not you've hired this person or promoted this person to a level beyond their competence level, really until they get into the job. So whenever you're using rule number one, just recognize there is a bit of a risk in that you're hiring someone who hasn't been proven yet at this level. And that's just a risk you take. However, if you've seen a track record of growth in their personal and professional life, number two, if you've seen leadership attributes where they're influencing without authority, there's a reasonably good chance, based upon my own lived experience and what I've seen in other people, that person's going to probably work out, barring some other factors. If you kind of solve for those separately and just put this one in isolation, generally speaking, I think you'll see good results.
Yeah, I like the Peter Principle as just kind of a general rule. I like that you are, like you're saying, taking a bit of a risk, and that once you figure things out, you should probably go to that next level, and keep expanding, keep growing, keep learning. That's been the case for me. Most of my roles I've been in, I've just been thrown to the wolves and just like, figure it out. Good luck, So
yes.
So yeah, I appreciate that. And as a parent of a 1-year-old, I am learning that once you figure things out, she moves to the next stage, and you got to start all over again. So,
correct.
That's great.
That's the hard part as a parent, is trying to stay at least one level ahead of where they're at. My child is now in the permit process of driving. So, I'm already starting to think about, her friends are now starting to drive, and who's okay for her to ride with, and all those things. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Don't give me nightmares yet, Tim. Okay. So
no, don't do that. Don't do that.
All right. So rule number 3, communication and emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And before that, let's go back to, to character and integrity, just for a second.
Yeah.
So, rule number 2 is character and integrity. I think it's worth just defining those for just a second, because I think we all come with different views on what that is and what are we looking for in a person, and why is that important when we're talking about promoting someone. Character, I like to define as the aggregate set of experiences that a person has had in their life that forms the basis of who they are now. it's an aggregate number of experiences that we all have that form the basis of who we are. That could be sourced from trauma. That could be sourced from being in a 2-parent home. That could be sourced in having lived in multiple countries, having, let's say, English as a second language. That could be sourced from being first in almost everything all your life. That could be sourced from having a lot of privilege. It could be sourced from being the poorest kid in the neighborhood or being the poorest kid in school. The point is that character is formed through an aggregate of experiences over time. And I would argue being in tough spots and working through those tough spots builds character. And that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about character and integrity. That's character. Integrity is the consistency of words and actions. We've talked about this before, and that the same person I am today on this podcast with you is who I'm going to be when we're done with this podcast and I'm talking with my spouse or in a business meeting or picking up the kids or what have you. And so the integrity is who we are when we think no one is watching. And just PS to all the leaders out there, people are always watching. So there's no such thing as when we think people are not watching. So what I say there is, when it comes to promoting somebody who's demonstrated a tendency to cut corners, who's demonstrated a desire to continuously blur the lines between right and wrong, who's demonstrated that they haven't always been completely honest about PTO or an expense statement or what have you. Again, we're looking for people who have a track record of demonstrating character and integrity consistently. Those are people you want to promote. And I would argue they'll never let you down in that regard, almost always. If there's a demonstration of that over time, what I say is that we won't regret it as leaders. We won't regret hiring a person who's really strong in that area. The risk of hiring and promoting someone who's maybe a little bit shady on character and integrity is that it can often be a very public and a very loud fall from grace when it happens. And oftentimes there are signs. As leaders, though, we have to be honest and not allow ourselves to allow the gift of the person to overweigh what we can clearly see with our eyes or clearly intuit emotionally from people who may be really, really gifted, but perhaps exhibit some other characteristics that cause us to wonder, is this the right thing? If you find yourself wondering or questioning, that's good. That's your intuition. And there's a good chance it's probably worth doing some checks or asking some other people. So promoting for character and integrity. And again, if you put 1 and 2 together, so rule number 1 plus rule number 2, yeah, you're probably 60 to 80% of the way there in terms of feeling pretty good about the candidate that you're promoting to that next level.
I like how you mentioned that the looking for character and integrity is in activities as small as PTO or expense reports or something like that. I think when you typically think about it, it's like, white collar crime or something that makes the headlines or some kind of, very terrible thing. But I like how it's very small daily activities that really show who you are. I think highlighting that is really important, especially on the leadership side.
Yeah, there's a, believe it or not, so I'm memorizing scripture this year. So one of the scriptures that I memorized is Luke chapter 16, verse 10. And what it says is, whoever can be trusted in the little things can also be trusted in the big things. And whoever is dishonest with little things will also be dishonest with the big things. And so when I talk about expense statement or PTO, again, and I've been in a senior executive role, so I literally have approved way more than 1,000 expense reports. I've evaluated and assessed lots and lots and lots of contracts. And it is amazing how many people just think they can, smooth one over. And in many cases, it might actually come up as no flag, Maybe the forensics didn't catch it. Maybe I don't catch it the first time, but you do start to see pattern. When that's the beauty of being in the senior executive role, is that you get lots of these every single week. And people often go to the same restaurants and take the same trips to the same places. And so you can start to figure out what a reasonable fare might be to this location versus that location, and whether or not you invited other people and how many drinks there were. These kinds of things. Maybe this is a tip for the emerging leader if you weren't aware of that, by the way. There's a lot that you can see. And my experience is that the people who are willing to kind of forfeit integrity on the small things, there's a good chance they're going to be willing to do the same when the spotlight's a lot brighter. And let me just tell you, the fall from grace is a lot more painful the higher you go. Best to get the character and integrity thing worked out very well early in one's career. The one challenge about character and integrity that I'll say is that, unfortunately, it is not a very easy mentally developed item. I mean, it is not something that people can easily develop in. Whereas what we're going to talk about in a second, communication, emotional intelligence, these types of factors, they can be coached in many regards. Character and integrity is largely formed by the time we walk ourselves into an organization at the age of 21, 22, 23. Yes, there's still experiences that shape and build our character, no question. Integrity, not a whole lot we can do for most people at that point in their life, which is why we have to be really, really careful about promoting people into those roles who have questionable tactics and methods.
Yeah, there's no certificate on how to be a good person, and demonstrating that for 20 years. That's really hard, especially when it's the company card and yeah, man, have another drink, like it's on the company.
Yes.
No, you mentioned scripture, and I was thinking too of 1 and 2 Timothy, where Paul's instructing what a good leader is supposed to look like, and talking so much about character and so much about who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. So yeah, very important.
Yes, absolutely. Paramount.
Okay, so rule 3, communication and emotional intelligence. Tell me about this one.
Yeah, there's a lot to this one. And maybe before we do this, let me back up a step. I should have said this in the very beginning to give a plug for what I consider to be a really, really outstanding book. It's a book, and I'm looking at it right now, by Patrick Lencioni, and it's called The Ideal Team Player. So some of what I'm talking about, if you just think about the ideal team player, is really sourced from that book. And so he's got 3 attributes in a person that form the ideal team player. The person is humble, they're hungry, and they're smart. Now, coincidentally or not coincidentally, 2 of those items are prominently displayed on my website because those are absolutely the people that I'm looking to work with. The smart stuff we can help with a little bit in some areas, but when he talks about being humble, he says it's the most important trait. A person who recognizes they've got flaws, recognizing they make mistakes, recognizing that they haven't learned everything. That's the most important quality because it says you can learn. The second quality is being hungry, meaning that this person is constantly seeking to learn. They want to get better. They want to improve. They're looking for ways that they can go and gain new skills, etc. And then smart really comes down to your people smarts. What kind of common sense do you have around people? Do you have high interpersonal skills? So now going back to rule 3 for me, we've talked about the ideal team player. For me, communication and emotional intelligence, what I've observed is that it is correlated. Every now and again, you'll find someone who's a really, really, really sharp communicator, but just doesn't get people very well. But that's rare, I would say. More often than not, it tends to be a situation where a person who listens, who understands, who demonstrates respect is also a good communicator, and vice versa. And it turns out that I'm not alone in just this idea. There's a guy by the name of Daniel Goleman who co-wrote a book called Primal Leadership. So Primal Leadership was the book that was written probably 10, 15 years back, and did a study of 3,800 executives across a variety of different industries. And in that study, what they found is that let's find the executives and let's group them into 2 buckets. Group number 1 is the star executive. Group number 2 is the average executive. And the way you differentiate those is by, 360 reports, reviews, their annual reviews, mid-year reviews, their bonus their results, the return on investment, et cetera, in their different businesses. So it turns out that 85% of the difference between the star executive and the okay or average executive was explained by EI, emotional intelligence factors. 85% of the difference was explained by these factors. Does the person listen? Does the person respect other people? Does the person demonstrate empathy? These are the emotional intelligence types of factors. And there's more. Are they honest? These kinds of things. And 85% of the difference between the star executive and the okay executive was explained by these factors, which says that communication and emotional intelligence is awfully important. So now you combine rule 1, track record of growth and leadership qualities. Number 2, a character demonstrated over a good period of time, demonstrated character and integrity. And then number 3, communication and emotional intelligence. You put these 3 together, while I guess I can't make a guarantee, it's the closest thing to a guarantee that I've seen in my own walk as well, is that when I promote people who have these 3 qualities, man, there's a good chance we're going to find some success.
How would you just briefly define communication? Is it that they're, and I'm trying to think of some kind of like practical day-to-day kind of communication. Is it that they're, very detailed in their communication, that they're brief? Like what, how do you mean that? Is it that they're direct do they have radical candor, to use that one book, when they're meeting, face to face, or how do you describe that a little bit more practically?
Yeah, I think all of those represent a little bit about what communication is. But communication is 2 ways. That's the main thing to remember about communication, just like our cell phones, right? There's a receiver and there's a transmitter, right? And the ability to listen as well as the ability to send back data is important. People who I think communicate well do both. They do a good job of listening, not just for words, but they're also listening for body language, tone, movement of body, all these kinds of things. And I think people who are communicating can also recognize the room. So one of the things that I think would drive just about every executive crazy, but oh my God, it's so difficult to just sit in a meeting. But there was dozens and dozens and dozens of these accounting reviews and operational reviews. And it was so hard to see the person in the front who is doing their presentation. It's a 30-minute meeting. They've got a 10-minute slot and they're on slide 1 of 10. And on slide 1, we've now exhausted 7 minutes. And they're still finding the need to go through every single bullet point on slide number 2. Woo! Between communication and emotional intelligence, we're failing, right? And that was something I would give very regular feedback on to people. So that's an example of a lack of communication and a lack of awareness, right? To read the room and recognize and maybe just, manage the time. Hey, I realize that you had a lot to share with us, and God knows I've been cut off, been in lots of meetings with the CEO, and unfortunately, the time has been elapsed, and so my 12-minute window now got cut to 2. It stinks. Happens to all of us. We all got a boss, except the board of directors. So at the end of the day, that's what I mean by communication. It's 2-way, the ability to listen and the ability to speak, the ability to write. It's all those things that go into it.
That's helpful. There's this new book by David Brooks, New York Times columnist, called How to Know a Person. And he talks about some of these emotional and communication issues that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on to the don't. You got 2 don'ts here. Technical, it's a caution, not a don't. It's a caution. Rule 4, technical expertise and a big ideas person. Tell me what you mean by that. Why be cautious of a person like that?
Yeah. So it's not cautious of the person.
Right. Yes.
Right. So one of the roles that you tend to see in technical organizations, you might have a software company or an IT company or Big Four, these type of companies, they tend to have a chief technology officer or a chief strategy officer. These people actually tend to be technical people. That's a good thing, and that's okay. You want those people. So by no means am I saying we don't want technical people in leadership roles. That is not what I'm saying. In fact, I would hope people saw me as somewhat technical in the roles that I had as I progressed through the organization. Yeah. What I am saying, however, is the person who values so much their technical expertise over their ability to lead people got to be really, really careful. So I was made aware of a situation here recently where a large organization has recently promoted someone to a significant role in the organization. And what oftentimes happens is sometimes leaders promote without vetting and validating the organization's view on the said person that they believe needs to be in this top role. So in this case, this person has a lot of great big ideas. No question about that. The person is smart. No question about that. The person understands the details of this particular functional area. No question. At the same time, their ability to lead people effectively is largely in question. However, leadership has made a decision. This is our person. And now they've anointed without validating and vetting with the organizations to see if this is someone they want to follow. Bad move by the organizations. And I believe when we do this as leaders, we set organizations back. Sometimes months, sometimes years, sometimes a decade or more. Because folks who really are gifted from a technical perspective, they ought to be in a senior role, but ought to probably have a smaller team. Because you don't want their primary function to be leading dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people. That's not their number one skill. What you want in an organization as a leader is you want the people in their roles doing the thing that they're best at regularly, like all the time. And so don't give them 200 people or 500 people to go lead. Instead, give them a smaller team and let them be in the meetings, let them contribute. They ought to have a senior title and ought to be paid and recognized for what they do, but let them do what they do well, which is bring their technical expertise and their great big ideas to the party. And maybe other teams are responsible for the execution of some of those things. But when you add so many people to a team and you ask that person to go lead them, and that's not their number one or even number two gift, maybe it's not even their number three desire, I think that hurts the organization. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, that's a very helpful distinction. I did not mean to say that there are some people you should be cautious of just because they're technically skilled. So that's really helpful. Everybody's got great gifts, but yes. What you're talking about here, obviously, is when you're leading teams, when you're leading people, have somebody who has that kind of communication, emotional intelligence that you have, and not specific technical.
Yeah, and
that's really helpful.
And the person that I'm thinking about kind of goes between 4 and 5. We sometimes, rule number 4 and rule number 5, we sometimes, instead of allowing ourselves to be inspired, we allow ourselves to be impressed. And often the person I'm describing, right? We just are so impressed by them, we just promote them. Oh, no. That just because we're impressed by them does not mean we need to promote them. You see this happen a lot in professional sports. The person who goes to the Indianapolis Combine, quarterback, let's just say. Now, all their career, 3 years in college, they started 1 year, maybe half of those games, they had really good games, and most of those games were not against great competition. But then they go to a gym where there's just people watching them with no defense, and they go out and throw the ball 70 yards, and they're 6'4" and 250 pounds. Oh, man, we're drafting that person in the first round. How many of those people work out? Very, very few, because we're impressed. And what we ought to be is inspired. We promote people, leaders, who inspire other people. When we do that, we win. When we promote people we're impressed by primarily, it leads to big problems.
I love that distinction. I've never heard that before, and I love that. That is so. I'm thinking of this quote of this woman saying that she was talking to 2 dignitaries a year apart at a dinner, and one of them, she said, I felt like he was the smartest man in England. And then the next year, he made me feel like I was the smartest person in England. And the way that leaders can communicate how they impress other people, and by making it about others, it can create that kind of inspiration like that, not just being impressed. That's
absolutely
really great. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, but you want to avoid promoting somebody who is arrogant, selfish, narcissist, all about themselves, their glory, their title. Is that where we're going with rule number 5?
Absolutely. Rule number 5. So again, first 3 rules are about things we want to do. The last 2 are about using extreme caution. And then lastly, this rule number 5, I do say never. Generally speaking, in communication, it hurts an argument to say never or always. And I always agree with those comments, with a few exceptions. And one of those when it comes to promoting people who are narcissists. What do I mean by narcissists? This person is highly self-absorbed. And they're self-absorbed because they've got significant underlying issues of self-worth, largely. And these folks are terrors in the organization. They are so concerned about themselves, self-protection. Did I get all the information I need? They're not thinking always about their team. And because they're largely thinking about themselves and they're in self-protection mode, it makes really for a horrible leader and a horrible promotion situation. And unfortunately, narcissism is a very difficult area to develop someone out of, because one of the things that is required is the ability to demonstrate humility. And with humility often comes awareness. And humility plus awareness plus desire lead to perhaps a change. Unfortunately, when we hire folks who are extremely selfish and arrogant, it often leads to really, really horrible outcomes in organizations this is where you see the mass exodus of people. If you ever wonder what happened over there in station BYD, I don't know. It was just the weirdest thing. All of a sudden, everybody started to leave. Yep. You might want to go check and see if rule number 5 was at stake. And perhaps rule number 4, where you didn't vet the organization to see if this is someone who they were even remotely interested in having as their leader. And people vote. This is something we learned, my wife expressed, or I guess it was expressed through a pastor at a former church of ours. And there was this debate on whether or not we should continue the midweek service. So you always have your weekend service, but then there's the weekday service. And there was this debate internally amongst the staff, and what one staff member was attempting to communicate to the senior pastors that people, look, Doc, people vote with their feet. They've already told you they don't want to come to the midweek service because you've seen the attendance dwindle and dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And so we don't need to collect a vote or do a survey. People have voted with their feet. And the same happens in businesses and organizations when they get these rule 4, rule 5 situations where we've made the mistake of putting people in a role, we've anointed them without vetting and validating whether or not that's a person who others can follow. And people vote with their feet. They leave. One after the other in many cases when this happens. And so I don't want to say irreparable damage is done to an organization, but significant damage is often done to an organization when we do that. And that's just not a trait. Narcissism, extreme selfishness, and arrogance, those are often traits that are very difficult to develop and coach out of people.
I've seen this in my own experience too. And I would argue they're almost difficult to detect a lot of times. I mean, I'm thinking back to what you just said about being impressed or being inspired. Yes. Usually people that are very arrogant, narcissistic, they're often charismatic, they're ambitious, yes. They're talented, yes. They're great communicators. Yes. And so how do you know? I guess is my question. Like, what's a red flag that you see? Like, okay, this is somebody who is genuinely very impressive, but they're not somebody that I want to promote because of X, Y, and Z characteristic.
So I say this: I'm blessed with the gift of discretion. That's one of my top 3 spiritual gifts. So I tend to be able to spot this maybe a little easier than because that's just a natural gift I have. But I would say if you don't have that gift, what you can look for is what happens to the people around that person who we're so impressed with, who's so talented, who seems to be so ambitious, so flamboyant, so outstanding, and so amazing. Let's put our eyes now on the people who've worked with him and around them. Have they also grown? Have you also seen them mature? And then what do those people who've worked closely with that person have to say about that person? And if there's a match, meaning, you know what I see from a distance matches what these folks who work with this person every day say, there's a good chance you got a winner. You got a real winner. If there's a situation where there's a disconnect, where what you see, oh, I'm impressed, but then you talk to the team and member after member after member tells you, yeah, really great at that, but then there's a good chance that we have something else going on. And again, the people who tend to be out for themselves, they're not out promoting other people. How often are they coaching other people? Are they mentoring other people? You look for growth in other people with the stars, the people, the so-called stars, the people who we think are the rock stars. Look out for who else around them is growing and developing. And if it's also people who just look like them and talk like them and come from their same experiences, that's an invalid result. Because that's not telling you the truth about whether or not this person can go and lead an organization of people who's going to be far more dynamic in terms of ethnicity and culture and background, professional experiences than perhaps the onesie twosies that they sort of bring with them for the ride, if you will. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm looking for the larger organization and multiple samples and see whether or not this person is really making a difference, making a positive impact in other people. That's what you're looking for.
That's helpful. I feel like my wife has that spiritual gift as well. So I've learned over the years to listen to, if she says, I don't know about that guy, it's like, okay, all right, I'm listening now, But it is,
Yes.
there's people in their wake, people like that, maybe they have friends, maybe there's people around them, like you're saying, but how are the people in their wake? I think that's super, super helpful.
Yeah. There was something that I did not say that I meant to say earlier, and it came around rule number 3 when we were talking about communication. There was once a situation, and I'm begging all hiring managers, leaders, senior executives, please don't do this to your people. I was asked to hire someone, and let me just say this as a parenthetical thought. Just because you make it to certain levels in the organization does not necessarily mean you have more authority on who you hire. A lot of folks don't know that. So anyway, I was asked to bring this person onto my team, and my question was, why? What about the process? Going to post a job, interview some folks. And they said, well, this will look...
Calculator.
Going back to a few, last conversation.
Yeah.
And their response was, well, it will look good for the organization that we're putting this person in that role. And of course, my response was, but, blah, 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 blah. I had these arguments. At the end of the day, I decided to acquiesce and not die on that particular hill. And we hired the person, promoted the person, actually, into this role. Didn't work out. Was I real surprised it didn't work out? No. I don't know, frankly, to this day, whether or not my boss even cared that it didn't work out, because their goal was to, I don't want to say have a publicity stunt, but it was to put this person in a role and that would somehow look good and perhaps make them look good. I don't know. The person actually was a pretty poor communicator and had some challenges with emotional intelligence. So that third leg, while they had some track record of growth, I don't know about leadership, but some track record of growth, they were a high character and high integrity person. But that third rule was a big fail. And on my own, I would not have hired or promoted that person into that particular role. Person is capable and had skill, just not for that particular role. And as leaders, we just gotta get out of the habit of anointing people and then asking other people to follow them. It's a bad habit, and we gotta stop it.
I love that it would actually set your organization back. Like if you want to keep going forward, progress, innovate, succeed, you've got to hire good people. You got to learn how to do that. And these, like to your point, even just the 3 rules, if you just look for those, 85% of the time or more, you're going to find a really great fit.
Yeah. And the times when there's not a match, it's typically because of just cultural fit. or personality dynamics that were just not able to be discovered or discerned through the process that you just didn't see or know. But outside of that, generally speaking, you get these first 3 rules right. I think most people are going to find success in the organization.
I love that. Tim, thank you. This is incredibly helpful. As always, this is, this is like required reading, required listening for anybody that's in charge of hiring other people, because it's so important.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, promoted is a big deal, and it sends huge signals across your organization, unintended and intended. And so as leaders and people in a position to promote folks, we just have to be aware of those signals that we're sending to the organization, because when we hire and promote leaders, it goes way beyond just the scope of our eyes and what our eyes can see. People talk. And so it's really important that we do that right.
Amen. People talk. That's a huge, important lesson. People talk. Hey, maybe in a text message, a friend group, but people will talk.
Yes, they do.
This is great. Tim, thank you so much. As always, incredible episode, and I'm excited for the next one. We will see you next time.
Me too. Sounds good.
Bye.